On the morning of my 65th birthday, I didn't wake up to breakfast in bed. There were no candles, no flowers, no calls from my only son. Instead, I received something I never thought I'd hear from the boy I once held in my arms. You should move into a retirement home. Leave the house and the money to me. For a moment time stood still. And then I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I finally understood. My life was no longer his to decide. And from that moment on I chose to take it back. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about becoming whole again. About a woman who spent her entire life giving, until she realized she had nothing left for herself. And when her only son gave her two cruel choices, serve his fiancé, or surrender everything she owned, she chose something unexpected, a luxury senior home. But more than that, she chose herself. What happened after would not only shock her son, but change the course of her life forever. I had planned to spend my birthday quietly. Just me, my little kitchen, the scent of my signature chicken casserole in the oven. The dining table was set. Silverware polished, candles waiting to be lit. There was even a crisp Caesar salad resting in the fridge. It was simple, warm, familiar, the kind of evening that said, "You're home. You're loved." Or at least, it used to. Colin hadn't stepped foot in this house for over a year. Still, he had promised a surprise. So I waited, and I hoped. At 7:30, I lit the candles. By 8 o'clock, I blew them out. And just when I was about to put everything away, the door creaked open, and everything I thought I knew about love, family, and motherhood changed forever. They say the older you get, the simpler your wishes become. And on my 65th birthday, I didn't wish for anything grand. No parties, no presents, no lavish dinners. All I wanted was for my son to come home. I spent the morning slowly, almost peacefully, folding linens, watering the roses, setting the table with the same care I used to give his lunchbox when he was 8. The casserole was in the oven. The candles were ready to be lit. And in my heart, there was still a little room for hope. But when the door finally opened that evening, what walked in wasn't the boy I raised. It was a man I barely recognized. He didn't say, "Happy birthday." He didn't even look me in the eye. Instead, with a smirk and a shrug, he gave me a gift I'll never forget. "You should move into a retirement home. Leave the house and the money to me." For a few seconds I didn't speak. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was simply stunned. That house wasn't just walls and windows. It was where I tucked him into bed during thunderstorms, where he took his first steps, where I held him when his father died. And now I was being told to leave it behind, like I was some elderly tenant overstaying her welcome. Sadly, stories like this aren't rare. I've since met other women, mothers, grandmothers, who were also treated like obstacles by the very children they once saw as miracles. One woman told me her daughter offered her a guest room, only if she agreed to babysit full-time and give up her social security check. Another said her son moved her in, only to sell her jewelry behind her back. It's heartbreaking, but it's real. The truth is, entitlement can grow in silence. It grows when we give and give without teaching gratitude. When we sacrifice so often that our children forget we're people too. That day, I learned something I'll never forget. Not every child who grows up grows wiser. And not every mother who grows older must become smaller. So instead of yelling or crying or begging, smiled. And I quietly made a decision, one that would change the rest of my life. Because if my own son couldn't see my worth anymore, then maybe it was time I started seeing it for myself. And that's when I picked up the phone and called someone I never thought I'd need, the admissions office at Skyview Estate. But before I could leave, there was one last chapter in the house I once called home. And it began with a woman named Tessa. Let me tell you about her. If walls could speak, my kitchen would whisper stories soaked in warmth, laughter, and the smell of cinnamon apple pie. It was never just a room. It was a living memory. The place where Colin sat on the countertop swinging his legs, watching me stir soup with curious eyes. Where he spilled flour on the floor trying to help with cookies, and proudly called it magic snow. That little kitchen was our sacred space. A place where hugs were stirred into every casserole, and every birthday cake carried more love than frosting. So when I set the table that evening, with silverware polished, the best china pulled from the cabinet, and my signature chicken and rice casserole still steaming, I wasn't just preparing dinner, I was preparing home. But when Colin walked in reeking of alcohol, with a heavily pregnant woman clinging to his arm, it was like winter had crept into the heart of summer. He called her Tessa. She was all perfume and pretense, eyeing the kitchen like it offended her. "This kitchen is so outdated," she scoffed, tapping her manicured nail on the old tiled countertop. "How am I supposed to make healthy food for the baby in here?" She didn't know this was the same countertop where Colin once did his homework while I made hot chocolate, or that the old oven she mocked had once baked every birthday cake he ever had. What hurt more than her words was that he didn't say a thing to defend the space that raised him. Instead, he slouched at the table, scrolling through his phone, and muttered, "Mom, mind fixing us some breakfast? Tessa's been really picky lately." That morning I found my mushroom soup, the one I had spent hours perfecting, poured into the trash with the spoon still inside, as if it was nothing more than dishwater. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. The kitchen where love once lived no longer belonged to me. It had been repurposed, not into something new, but into something cold. Place where convenience trumped care. And I think this is something many women face as they grow older. Our spaces, our traditions, our time, slowly dismissed as old-fashioned. We're told to make room, to step aside, to stay quiet. But what people often forget is this. It's not the gadgets that make a kitchen warm. It's the memories, the hands that built it, the heart that kept it going. The moment I saw my soup in the trash, I knew this wasn't just about a meal. It was about being erased little by little. And I made a promise to myself. I would not be erased, because soon enough, someone would try to erase even more. Not just my cooking, but my legacy. And her name was Tessa. Tessa didn't enter my life with warmth or grace. She floated in loud perfume, sky-high heels, and a belly she kept patting like a precious treasure, as if reminding us all she carried the future. She didn't even bother pretending to like me. From the moment she stepped into my home, it was clear, this wasn't a family visit. It was a takeover. She didn't ask. She assumed. Assumed she could take the master bedroom. Assumed I would cook, clean, and cater to her every craving. Assumed that I, now retired, existed for her convenience. "Are you sure this is going to work?" she asked Colin right in front of me, giving me a side glance like I was a defective appliance. "She doesn't exactly look fit enough for baby duty." I remember standing there, hands clenched around the hem of my dress, thinking, when did I become the help in my own story? But the worst came a few mornings later. She was in the kitchen again, this time shoving my fine bone china into a cardboard box. "This stuff is so dated," she muttered, lips pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. "I'm getting a more modern set." I stared at her quietly. That china belonged to my mother, passed down like a whisper from one generation to the next. It held memories of Sunday dinners, of laughter echoing through rooms now far too quiet. But to Tessa they were just clutter. She wasn't shy about her intentions. She didn't care about me, about history, about home. What she cared about was ownership, control, and my son. He let her. He watched her chip away at my world piece by piece, and said nothing. In fact, he said something worse. "She's carrying my child, Mom. Can't you be a little more supportive? The house will be mine eventually anyway." Eventually. That one word hit me harder than any insult ever could. Because in their minds my time was up. My presence was a placeholder, a nuisance until they could get what they really wanted. I've since learned that people like Tessa appear in many families. They wear charm like a costume, say the right things when they need to, but underneath it's calculation, not care. They use smiles to disarm, pregnancy to gain leverage, and entitlement as a weapon. I've heard from other women too. A retired teacher whose daughter-in-law moved in temporarily, then slowly pushed her out of her own home. A widow whose son's fiancé convinced him that the old woman's energy was bad for the baby. There's a name for this kind of manipulation: emotional eviction. You're not kicked out by force. You're nudged out by neglect. And here's the hard truth. Sometimes, the biggest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. Comes from the people who say they love you, but don't stand up for you. That was the day I knew. I wasn't just losing my home. I was losing my place in the story. And I had two choices: fade quietly into the background, become their unpaid nanny, cook and caretaker, or write a new chapter, one where I wasn't the servant, but the author of my own life again. And that's exactly what I set out to do. But before I walked out that door for good, there was one final moment, the one that sealed everything. It began not with anger, but with a bowl of soup in the trash. That night, I stood alone in the kitchen, watching the soft flame of a single candle dance in the quiet. It was the last one I had lit that day. My 65th birthday. I had relit it 3 times. Each time I told myself, maybe this will be the moment he walks through the door. And each time it flickered, then faded just like my hope. The casserole sat untouched on the counter, still warm, still waiting. So was I. But when Colin finally came home, drunk, dismissive and flanked by Tessa, he never even looked at the table I had set for him. He barely acknowledged the meal I had made. And the next morning, as I quietly gathered the cold dishes, I opened the trash bin and saw the ceramic bowl, the one with the mushroom soup I had spent 2 hours simmering, poured straight into the garbage. The spoon was still inside. It wasn't just a bowl of soup. It was a symbol of everything I had given. The meals, the care, the holidays I worked through, the nights I stayed up sick with worry. And now, tossed aside, without a second thought, I remember standing there, hands trembling ever so slightly, realizing something I hadn't wanted to admit. He didn't just forget my birthday. He forgot who I was. And that's a grief no mother is ever quite prepared for. You see, there's a moment that sneaks up on every parent. When your child stops needing you. That's natural, healthy even. But there's another kind of moment. The moment when your child stops seeing you. Stops valuing who you are beyond what you offer them. That's not natural. That's a choice. And Colin had made his. I've heard similar stories from other mothers. One woman shared how her grown son stopped calling, except when he needed money. Another told me her daughter moved her into the basement while turning the upstairs into an Airbnb. We don't talk enough about this quiet kind of heartbreak. The heartbreak that doesn't come with slammed doors or screaming matches, but with silence, cold dinners, and broken trusts served over morning coffee. That day I learned something important. Love without respect is not love. It's convenience. And I had been convenient for far too long. So I did something unexpected. I walked to the phone, picked it up, and called Skyview Estate. I'd like to reserve a premium independent living suite, I said. For 20 years. Paid in full. When they asked if I had any emergency contacts, I paused, then answered softly. No family. It was the first time I had said it out loud. And strangely, it felt like relief. Because I realized in that moment that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. Being alone by choice can be an act of power. But the house wasn't empty yet. There were still days left. Days where I watched Tessa redecorate rooms that weren't hers. And Colin take more phone calls than he did notice of me. And I knew. This house was no longer my home. But there was someone who had once helped me make it feel like one. Someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Her name was Martha. And the moment I called her, everything began to change. I dialed the number with fingers that trembled. Not from fear, but from memory. It had been over a year since we last spoke. After Colin decided she was no longer necessary, he let Martha go without so much as asking me. Just like that. He dismissed the woman who had been part of our lives for nearly 2 decades. But when she answered the phone, her voice was warm, just as I remembered. "Ma'am, is that really you? I've been praying you were all right." I kept telling myself, if I don't hear from you soon, I'll just show up on your doorstep. My throat tightened. "I'm okay," I said softly. "But Martha, I need you to come back." And she did. That very afternoon, like no time had passed at all. She walked through the front door like she owned the breeze that followed her in, dropped her coat, tied on an apron, and headed straight to the kitchen. "Take out containers. In your fridge." She clucked her tongue. "How have you been eating this garbage?" I smiled wearily. "I still know how to cook, Martha. But this kitchen doesn't belong to me anymore." She stopped in her tracks, glanced toward the living room, and her eyes narrowed. "That girl." He nodded. "She didn't need more explanation." "I always said the young master had poor judgment," Martha muttered. "But this takes the cake." And just like that she was back. Fiercely protective. Unapologetically loyal. Not just my housekeeper, but my ally. That night she made my favorite, beef stew with root vegetables, paired with her signature homemade cornbread. And for the first time in weeks, I sat at the table and felt like myself again. Each bite tasted like memory, like dignity slowly stitching itself back together. When Colin came home, the scent of warm stew greeted him at the door. He smiled, nostalgia flickering in his eyes. "Smells good in here tonight." Martha emerged from the kitchen, still holding the pot. "Sir," she said, not unkindly, "this was your favorite when you were a boy. Remember?" But his smile faltered. Reality crept back in. "What are you doing here?" he asked, frowning. "Didn't I tell you you were retired?" "I brought her back," I said simply. Colin groaned, rubbing his temples. "Mom, you're being stubborn again. I know you don't like Tessa, but she's carrying your grandchild. Can't you try to be a little more understanding?" I let out a soft laugh. "You think I brought Martha back because I don't like Tessa?" I gestured toward the table. "This is a home, not a rental, not a crash pad. You don't get to erase everything that made this place mine." He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "You're ruining our chance to be a real family," he said. "If this is what you call family," I replied, calm but clear, "then I'd rather be alone." He slammed his fork down, stormed off. But I didn't flinch. Because in that moment, I understood something important. Family isn't always who shares your blood. Sometimes it's who shows up without being asked. People like Martha, who knew my favorite soup, who remembered birthdays without reminders, who stood by me even after being pushed out. I've heard stories like mine from other women. A neighbor once told me how her sister hadn't visited in years, but the young man from the pharmacy walked her groceries home every week and made her feel seen. Another woman said her best friend of 40 years was more of a daughter to her than her own. We don't choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the people who make us feel at home. That's what Martha was for me. And as she quietly cleaned the kitchen that night, humming a song only the old walls would remember, I knew she wasn't just cleaning countertops. She was restoring something I'd almost lost, my sense of self. But of course, Colin and Tessa weren't done. They had one more plan, one last push to try and take everything. Only this time, I wasn't going to sit quietly and let it happen. Because what they didn't know was, I had already made my move. Before we continue, I want to pause for just a moment. Have you ever felt replaced in your own home? Like the people you loved the most forgot who you are? Or worse, treated your kindness as weakness. If this part of the story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Whether you've experienced something similar, or just want to send a message of strength to others, your words matter. Let's create a space where stories like this don't go unheard. Alright, let's go back to Amanda, and the moment she decided to stop surviving and start standing tall. They say there's always a moment, a final, quiet breaking point, when something inside you just clicks. Not with a scream, not with a slam of the door, but with the stillness of a truth you can no longer ignore. For me, that moment came one gray afternoon, when I walked into the kitchen and found Tessa stuffing my mother's bone china into a cardboard box. No permission, no explanation. I'm getting a more modern set. I stood in the doorway, frozen, not because of the plates, but because of everything they represented. That china had been in our family for 3 generations. I still remembered my mother's hands polishing them before Sunday dinner. I remembered setting them out the night Colin brought home his high school diploma. They weren't just dishes. They were history. That set belonged to my mother, I said quietly. Tessa didn't even turn around. Well, she's gone, isn't she? You can't live in the past forever. I stepped forward slower this time. This is my home, I said, calm but firm. Not yours. And it's not up to you. She scoffed. You sure act like this place is still yours. But let's be honest. Won't it all belong to Colin soon anyway? That was it. Final straw. The moment the weight of every insult, every dismissal, every assumption settled into resolve. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply smiled. 'Cause they thought they had won. They thought I was still the soft-hearted woman who would bite her tongue and sacrifice quietly. What they didn't know was that I had already signed the paperwork. The trust, title transfer, the new chapter. They were playing checkers, but I'd been playing chess. That evening, I crouched beside the half-packed box, gently taking each dish and returning it to the cabinet, one piece at a time. Every porcelain plate I tucked away was a promise to myself. You will not be erased. Later that night, as I sipped tea on the porch with Martha, we talked about women like Tessa, and how often people mistake kindness for weakness. She thinks she's clever, Martha said, shaking her head. But she doesn't know who she's dealing with. And she was right. Because behind every quiet woman who has been overlooked, undervalued or underestimated, there is strength that has been tested, not broken. I've heard stories like mine from others. A friend of mine, widowed and retired, once told me how her nephew tried to sell her car behind her back, assuming she didn't need it anymore. Another woman shared how her daughter's husband began secretly redirecting her pension into their joint account. They think we're fading, she told me. But we're just done playing nice. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always make you bitter. Sometimes it makes you brilliantly clear. And that clarity became the fuel for what came next. I called my attorney the next morning, finalized the transfer of the house to Martha and 2 of my oldest, most trusted friends, adjusted my will, locked the trust, cut off every financial access Colin had ever known. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it out of self-respect. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. The quiet reclaiming of my name, my space, my legacy. And while they were still playing house in a space no longer theirs, Skyview's relocation team was already on their way. Because I wasn't just moving out. I was moving on. The morning I left my old house, the sky was soft and golden. There was no dramatic goodbye. No suitcase thrown in anger. Just me standing by the window, watching the movers quietly pack the last few boxes. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. Felt free. Skyview Estate wasn't what most people imagined when they heard the words, senior living. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't silent. It felt more like a boutique hotel wrapped in a blooming garden, with balconies that caught the morning light. and walking paths that always seem to lead you gently back to yourself. From the moment I arrived, something in me began to unfold. The staff greeted me by name. A kind woman with silver-streaked hair handed me a cup of rose tea and said, "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitmore." Not facility. Not Unit 3B. Just home. Each resident had a private suite. But more than that, we had space. Space to think, to breathe. To rediscover who we were beyond the labels of wife, mother, caretaker. I joined a gardening class on a whim. Then a watercolor workshop. Then an art salon where local artists came to speak, share and teach. And in one of those classes, I opened a trunk I hadn't touched in years, and found a painting my college friend Emily had given me long ago. A single orchid, blooming against a backdrop of soft dusk. She'd titled it, "Orchids at Dusk." I had forgotten how much I used to love art. Forgotten that once, I dreamed of curating exhibitions, of helping young artists find their voice. That's what Skyview gave me. Not just rest but restoration. Not just peace but purpose. I remember reading once that the most dangerous lie women tell themselves is, "It's too late for me." But here, surrounded by kind faces and creative energy, I realized it's only too late if you never start. I've heard of women who became authors at 70, painters at 75, business owners in their 80s. And here I was, at 65, starting a foundation, the Emily Harrington Art Fund, dedicated to supporting young artists from underrepresented backgrounds. Because if I was going to rewrite my life, I wanted it to mean something. I wanted to turn what could have been wasted wealth into something beautiful. Colin once asked, "Who sets up a charity fund at your age?" The answer is simple. A woman who finally has the space to remember who she really is. But of course, peace has its price. And sometimes, even when you walk away, the past comes knocking. And one day it did. Right at Skyview's front gate. Colin used to be what people called the golden boy. The one who had every advantage, every door opened for him. He wore designer suits before he could pronounce the brand, took private tennis lessons on weekends, and told people, with a proud little grin, "My mom always makes sure I get the best." And I did. I gave him the best I had. My time, my energy, my youth. And every ounce of stability I could build after his father passed. But there's something people don't talk about when they praise golden boys. Gold doesn't shine on its own. Someone has to polish it. Someone has to hold it up to the light. When I stepped away, when the hand that had always caught him was no longer there, he began to rust. After I left the house and cut off his financial access, I stopped hearing from him altogether. But his name still found its way back to me. Whispers. From friends of friends. From Martha. From the bank manager who once managed our family accounts. Colin had tried to apply for a personal loan. It was denied. He'd offered the house as collateral, only to find out the deed was no longer in his name. Tessa left him shortly after that. Her silk words turned sharp. "You said your mom would take care of us," she snapped. "Turns out, she's the only smart one in this family." He begged friends for investments. No one answered his calls. He pitched half-baked startup ideas to former classmates, most of whom politely declined, and some of whom didn't bother to respond. And slowly, the world stopped treating him like a prince. Because without the gold, without the polish, he was just a man who never learned to stand on his own. I've seen this happen more than once. A neighbor's son, once spoiled with every toy imaginable, ended up living in his parents' basement at 40, angry at the world for not handing him success on a silver platter. Another woman at Skyview told me her granddaughter spent years blaming others for her failed career, never once realizing she'd never put in the work herself. It's a hard truth for any parent to face. Sometimes the child you raised with love and hope grows into someone who doesn't yet deserve either. And that doesn't mean we failed. Just means they have to find their own way now. Entitlement doesn't disappear until consequences arrive. And for Colin, those consequences came not as thunder, but as silence. No more money, no more favors, no more mother to pick up the pieces. But then one afternoon, as I was finalizing grant approvals for the foundation, a nurse knocked gently on my door. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a man downstairs at the gate. He says he's your family." And just like that, the past I thought I had closed the door on was waiting just outside it. He was standing just beyond the hydrangeas, in the soft light of the sky view garden, shoulders slumped, clothes wrinkled. His once confident gaze now weighed down with regret. I hadn't seen Colin look like that since he was 5, after he broke my favorite vase and came to me, eyes red, hands trembling, mumbling, "I didn't mean to." But this wasn't a child's mistake. And this time, I wasn't rushing to soothe him. I stepped onto the path, calm and steady. "You won," he said first. "You got everything." I shook my head gently. "This was never a competition, Colin. I never needed to win against you. I only needed to choose myself." He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe for the first time he was seeing me not as a resource, but as a person with boundaries and finally with peace. "I messed up," he whispered. "I have nothing now. No house, no job, even Tessa's gone." There was a time I would have reached for his hand, would have said, "Come inside. We'll figure this out." But that Amanda no longer lived here. "I'm not abandoning you, Colin," I said softly. "I'm allowing you to take responsibility, for the first time in your life." He looked away, jaw tight, as if the weight of those words was too heavy to carry. "You didn't used to be like this," he muttered. "No," I replied. "I wasn't. I used to give everything, even my dignity, even my dreams. But that woman, she's finally resting. And the one who stands before you now lives for herself." He didn't speak. He didn't ask to come in. He simply stood there as I turned back toward the building. The sliding glass doors closed softly behind me, and that was the moment I knew. Some doors don't slam. They simply close, quietly, completely, and forever. I've heard women say that letting go of a child who refuses to change feels like grieving someone still alive. And they're right. But it's not just loss. It's clarity. The painful clarity that healing sometimes means letting someone fall. One resident at Skyview once told me, "The hardest part of motherhood isn't raising them. It's stepping back when they refuse to rise." That day I stepped back. And I didn't look over my shoulder. But life wasn't done writing yet. And as spring bloomed across the Skyview garden, something unexpected arrived. Not from the past, but from the future. Spring came gently to Skyview. The tulips in the garden stretched toward the sun like they had something to say. I finally understood what it meant to feel whole again. It had been 3 months since I closed the door on my old life. 3 months since I let go of the guilt, the grief, the weight of trying to be everything to everyone. In its place, something else bloomed. Purpose. And yes, even joy. I spent my mornings walking through the community garden, watching herbs take root and roses unfurl. Martha kept sending me photos of the old house, now filled with laughter, shared meals, and life again. It no longer hurt to look at those pictures. In fact, they made me smile. "You didn't just give us a house," Martha wrote one day. "You gave us dignity." And maybe that was the most surprising part of this whole journey. Realizing that in letting go, I hadn't lost anything. I had simply made space for something better. The Emily Harrington Art Foundation had officially launched. We'd already funded 12 young artists, 2 of whom were preparing for their first solo exhibitions. One of them, a shy girl named Nora, approached me after a small student showcase at Skyview. She held out a watercolor painting. Soft strokes, a quiet lake, and a single orchid in bloom. "I made this for you," she whispered. "I heard you love orchids." I took the painting in my hands, and something caught in my throat. "You know," I said with a smile, "this looks a lot like me." She looked confused. "Really?" "Yes," I nodded. "But not anymore. I'm not the woman standing alone by the lake anymore. I've stepped into my own life. And that's exactly what this story has been about, hasn't it? Not revenge, not punishment, but rebirth. From being cast aside, to choosing your place. From being used, to using your voice. From being broken, to blooming fully finally. I used to think my legacy would be in the things I left behind. The house, the savings, the name carved on a plaque. But now I know, real legacy isn't built on what we give away. It's built on the lives we lift, the dreams we protect, the courage to reclaim our stories, even when the world tells us we're done. So here I am, Amanda Whitmore, age 65, no longer somebody's backup plan, no longer a shadow in someone else's story, but a woman in full bloom, finally gloriously free. And you, yes you who've walked with me through this story, ask you this: what's your next chapter? If this story touched something in you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's remind each other that no matter our age, it's never too late to begin again. Thank you so much for staying with Amanda's story until the very end. It wasn't an easy journey, but sometimes it takes losing everything to finally find yourself again. If there's one lesson we can all take from her story, it's this: you're never too old to choose yourself, not too late to walk away from what hurts, and never too far gone to start again on your own terms. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or reminded you of someone you love, please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every word, and your voice matters more than you know. And if you believe stories like Amanda's deserve to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's always another chapter waiting, and I can't wait to share it with you. Until next time, take care of your heart and never stop choosing yourself.